Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from Danny Speed. Your internet is fine. You don't need an engineer. Let's jump right in. So I work for a company that provides VoIP and networking solutions and IT support. So I get this call from a well-known angry customer who also happens to be friends with the boss. To top it off, we usually only support businesses and not residential customers, but we sold him some internet on the cheap for his mother's house. The conversation with the angry customer, Bob. Good afternoon. You sold us dodgy internet. Been trying to call all weekend. Sorry, sir. Our offices are only open 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, but let me take some details for you and run some tests on our side and get back to you. My mother is 86 years old and is a vulnerable person and hasn't been able to watch TV. I understand that, sir, but if you give me some details, I can investigate for you and get this resolved ASAP. No, just send an engineer out tonight, currently 4:30 on a Monday. Bob ends the call. At this point, I go away to speak to my manager and big boss, get some background, find the details I need to investigate, and the lines are fine. Angry Bob calls again. Are you sending an engineer? I have run some checks on the circuits and it's absolutely fine, so an engineer wouldn't be able to do anything. If you tell me what the problem is, I can help you try and resolve it over the phone. No, just send the engineer. Okay, but you will have to accept potential charges if the fault is not with the line and is with the local equipment. I really think we should try some first line resolutions first. No, send the engineer. 24 hours and a 270-pound call-out charge later, the engineer didn't fix the internet. Why am I being charged? As I previously stated, the line checks were fine and the engineer is only responsible for line maintenance. It sounded like it was a local issue. Fine, you get down here and sort out the router. It has to be that router you sold us. I will have to clear this with Big Boss. Should we go over first line resolutions first, or at least give me a description of the problem? No, I'll speak to Boss myself. Hangs up. Boss says, Dan, just to shut him up, would you fancy going to take a look? Usual charges would apply if it's not a fault with our equipment. No problem. So I go to visit the house. Luckily, Angry Bob isn't there, but his sister is, who is polite enough. It turns out there was an issue with their Android streaming box used to stream international channels, and since they were nice enough, I reconfigured that for them. They also had no other devices actually connected to the Wi-Fi, so I connected the house up, including their security system, etc. The best part of this is that I could have talked him through all of this, as it was very simple stuff, even though they aren't covered, and would have taken about 10 to 15 minutes. But he ended up paying over £500 in call-out charges. There's a couple of things to remember from tech support. Number one, some people just have too much money and they don't want to deal with any kind of troubleshooting. They'd rather pay for somebody to come out and do it for them. I can completely understand this too, because if I had unlimited funds, I'd probably want somebody else to come around and cut the lawn and wash my cars and things like that. Just little things that save you time during the day. I can guarantee you though, if this customer was a friend of Big Boss, there's no way he paid that bill in the end. Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from Pipe Organ Transplant. Typical jerk neighbors complain about the truck in my yard, so I replace it. Let's jump right in. I live in a mostly quiet neighborhood with lots of snowbirds and weekenders because of the proximity to a lake. The year-rounders are mostly retired and people generally get along fine. A couple years ago, neighbors on one side built a new garage and driveway, moving their cars much closer to my existing forsythia hedge. I love the forsythia in the spring and basically let it grow however it likes so I can have the bright yellow flowers. Almost immediately they started complaining that the hedge blocked their view as they backed out of their driveway. In my state, neighbors have no right to a view extending over someone else's property, and our Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that as long as trees and bushes do not actually infringe onto the roadway, property owners have no obligation to trim for visibility. I keep a 5-foot strip mowed between my hedge and the road, perfectly reasonable to my way of thinking. Since they have no recourse regarding the hedges, they instead complain to county code enforcement about anything else they can think of. My brother parked his licensed and insured project truck on my property a while back because he was in the process of moving and needed a spot for it while he was figuring things out. In the meantime, he was in a bad accident in another vehicle, and the truck has been sitting for over a year now. The license plate recently expired, and I got a letter from the county with threats of fines if it wasn't removed. Cue the malicious compliance. My brother decided to sell the truck for scrap and had it towed away this morning. This gave my neighbors their temporary victory as they observed from their deck and nearly 6 inches of improved view from their driveway. At least until I moved my second vehicle, a 1960 Lincoln, which is about 2 feet longer than the truck with current plates and insurance, into that place this afternoon. As a single person with more than one vehicle, I may get around to driving that old car at least once more before winter. One thing that really baffles me is how people think they have the right to complain about what other people are doing within the boundaries of their own darn property. Like, it's none of your business, screw off. I get though that sometimes you do have to deal with neighbors like this, so OP, I think every once in a while, maybe once a week, you should start up that car, move it about a foot backwards or a foot forwards, and then you can say, well, it's definitely not an abandoned vehicle, I do move it once a week. Our next story today comes to us from Strong Abbreviations 5. Neighbor complained to the HOA about my yard. Let's jump right in. So I have a Karen for a neighbor. She's a grumpy old C with a live-in son in his 40s and no other family or friends. And when I say she's a Karen, we're talking to the point that she came into my property to yell at our landscaper about a boulder he was installing on our property. Something about believing it would fall over onto more of our property. A few months after we moved in, we received a letter from the HOA saying they'd received complaints and asking that we make sure we're mowing, watering, and maintaining. I chalked it up to moving into a nicer neighborhood and made an effort to mow twice a week instead of my normal once. Added a little time to the sprinklers and figured all was good. Apparently, it was not all good as we received another letter stating the complaints had continued and the HOA wanted to talk with us to see what the problem was. I should note, we had just moved in not that long ago and hadn't landscaped the back yet, so we're letting our dogs pee on the front at night, which led to the inevitable patches of bright green grass that grows stupid fast. Now, I'll freely admit, I don't keep my yard to the level of some of my neighbors, but it was in perfectly good shape outside some green spots in an otherwise average-looking yard, and I do my best to keep things mowed and looking decent. Turns out our grumpy C had taken real offense to this and started complaining to the HOA. The hearing ended up bringing mostly incoherent rambling, but the bottom line was she didn't like how our lawn looked with the green spots. While the HOA agreed this was not her business and definitely not theirs, I decided she was right and we would stop letting our dogs out in the front to pee, as I also don't like the green spots. Now I put them on the leash and let them do their business in her yard, red tree lawn, and I'm clearly not the only one, as her entire yard is now covered in pee spots and dead spots on her actual lawn, which my dogs don't step on. I'm pretty sure she's complained about everyone with a dog, and now the entire neighborhood takes their dogs to her yard. The best part, she actually does a crap job taking care of her lawn. Weeds and crabgrass everywhere. She just waters it almost non-stop. So today, I got to report her to the HOA for her yard looking like total crap. If it were any other house, and there are much worse, I wouldn't care at all. But this lady wanted lawns without spots, so I'm just doing my part to enforce her rules. Now, OP did add an edit onto their story. It says, edit. To everyone hating on HOAs, they're hit and miss for sure. But in this case, they didn't do anything but tell me someone complained, and then tell her I wasn't violating any rules, and they weren't going to be involved. Also, HOAs are often surprisingly easy to take over. You just have to skip the whining about how terrible they are and do the work instead. If the HOA is that bad, talk to some neighbors. Tell them you're going to run for the board and get them to vote for you. Then help others do the same. And remember what you hated about the previous board. Be forewarned, everyone finds a reason to complain. No one is willing to help out. Yep, going right back to the comments I made on the previous story, I don't give a flying F what my neighbor's yard looks like, and it's really not up to me anyway unless it's actually encroaching on my property in some way. People who have a problem with their neighbors like this really need to get themselves a different hobby. Our next story comes to us from Hoovy and Spawn. Take 2 paid days off to think about why you want to continue working here. Let's jump right in. Many years ago, I got a job working in a retail store. This store and 2 others were owned by a young couple and another young woman. I worked there happily for about a year and became very good at my job, which included reminding the owners when stock needed replacing, merchandising, etc. At one point, we lost a few staff in rapid succession, leaving myself and my friend as the only long-term staff. Then, my friend was offered a managerial position with one of our competitors, so she left as well. This left me to train all the new staff, run the floor, deal with vendors, place orders, do pricing, basically manage the store. So I approached the owners about being named the new manager since I was already doing the job, just without the pay or title for several months. They said that sounds great, but we'd like you to do a management course before we make it official. But before you do that, can you just wait a couple more months until all the new staff have been trained? I naively agreed to do this, thinking long-term it would be to my benefit. Now, during the waiting time, one of the new staff got very chummy with the owners. She had never worked retail before, wasn't particularly good at the job, but was super friendly to them. Next thing I know, they have appointed her the new manager. Needless to say, I didn't take this news particularly well, especially considering she was still constantly asking me how to do things. Let's just say my attitude towards work changed drastically. I no longer gave a crap. Stock was getting low, not my job. Next week's roster hadn't been done, not my job. I still performed all the tasks I was paid to do, and all my customers loved me, but I stopped doing any extra work. So then, I get dragged into the owner's office for a meeting. We have noticed that your attitude has changed. You aren't going above and beyond, blah blah. So we would like to give you the next 2 days off to think about why you want to continue to work here, and we would like it in writing. Before I had even walked out, I knew I was going to be resigning. I went home, talked to my husband, and he agreed I should just quit. So I took my 2 paid days off to spend time with my family and get a new job. When I went back into work, I was greeted with smiles, and they eagerly took the piece of paper I handed them. The look on their faces dropped to shock when they realized what they were reading was my resignation and not an account of how much I loved working there and all the reasons I wanted to stay. I worked my 2 weeks notice and happily left to greener pastures at my new job. Less than a year later, their store closed down, so I guess their choice of manager didn't go so well. This one completely reminds me again of working at the furniture leasing company for that wonderful boss, Rick. Now, you might have heard me mention him in comments after stories a few times before. There might even be a t-shirt out there that says "Screw you, Rick" on the back, or something like that, link in the description down below. But after working at that company for 3 years, I had the highest seniority there. 2 new people were hired, one of them was a female, and there'd never been a female working in that store before, and oh my gosh, the boss went crazy over some TNA. She got all the preferential treatment, and my seniority just didn't matter anymore. So I didn't stick around for very long. And for those of you who have asked in the comments of the previous videos, there is a video coming out soon, Tales from Retail, with my story about Rick the Dick, the big fish in the little pond. Alright, our next story today comes to us from Swordfish Trombone 13, Time Clock Compliance. Let's jump right in. Going to be a bit vague here as to the job because I still work at this place. After becoming burned out being a tech guy, I had an opportunity to work in a special program in a completely unrelated field, but one that made use of my secondary set of skills. I joined as a member of the department and, through a series of hilariously cringy actions by the head of the department, ended up being assistant to the director, who replaced the director that hired me. He and I got along swimmingly, and we rebuilt the entire department to not be a money pit like it was before. Our time clock is web-based, but our internet connection is iffy at the best of times. Sometimes punches go missing or don't even get recorded. I asked for permission to have access to edit punches, so the main office that took forever to make edits didn't have to deal with it. This was granted, and things shaped up even more. As assistant director, I had a guaranteed 40 each week, but was hourly and not salary. Because of the frenetic pace of what I do, punching the clock can be tricky, as I do lots of work before and after scheduled time. I do not mind this because my days are pretty easy in general, and my boss and I are very casual in interaction. He trusts me, and I wouldn't dare betray that trust. My erratic clock punches began to accrue overtime, and the CFO caught wind of this and gently told me that I cannot get overtime unless it's an emergency or a crunch or busy in our industry. After talking with my boss, we decided to allow me to edit my times to get the straight 40 to appease the CFO. 3 years pass and I ask for a raise. Hey, I had been comfortable, but 3 years without a raise seemed a bit much. The CFO grants my raise, but tells me that I cannot edit my times, that I have to punch in and out like everyone else. I explain the situation to him, but he's old and set in his ways and says that this is the way things are. I tell my boss, who is not happy about this, but we come up with a malicious compliance plan. I clock in like everyone else, a few minutes before start and a few minutes after for end. These few minutes add up, and before you know it, I'm getting at least an hour extra pay per week. The CFO calls me and says, "Hey, you can't get overtime." I asked him on speaker with my boss in the room, who also said hello when I answered, if he wanted me to stand at the clock and wait for exact times to clock in and out. He said that would be acceptable, and my boss said, "Are you going to pay him time for standing at the clock on company property?" CFO was about to say no when I guess his brain jumped into gear and realized he was about to suggest something illegal. I explained that I sent CFO an email explaining that this would happen, copied to my boss, and that he never responded. He was warned and still decided to stick to his guns. "Go ahead and edit your times," he says dejectedly. "Oh no, sir. He will just keep doing what he's been doing. It balances out because he puts in so much extra work. It's only fair," says my boss. Now I get about an hour of OT and am left alone by the CFO. So glad I'm not on salary. Anybody else getting office vibes from this one? Are you assistant director or assistant to the director? I love OP's response down in the comments. It says, "It's like karma points on Reddit as far as I'm concerned. In the grand scheme of things, it means nothing, but to the people it means something to, it means everything." Check out all 5 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.